Is President Biden's executive order to limit the entry of migrants crossing the border having an impact? The Department of Homeland Security says that fewer people crossed in a week and deportations are up, but a non-governmental group at the border says they haven't seen significant changes. The executive order is also being challenged in the courts now by the ACLU and migrant groups. For more on this, we want to welcome in Cori Alonso-Yoder. She is an associate professor of fundamentals and lawyering at the George Washington University. Cori, good to have you along with us. In a nutshell, what is it that the president's executive order would do?
Thanks for having me, Tom. Well, the executive order is aimed at trying to limit the number of asylum seekers who are entering through the ports of entry at the U.S.-Mexico border. So the idea there is to try to limit this historical surge of migrants who are coming seeking protection from displacement. So the idea of the Biden administration is to limit those numbers.
So what is the argument against it?
The argument against the order is that really it'll just drive people underground. So some of the networks that profit from this kind of human smuggling will now have an even more fruitful marketplace from which to be able to scurry and hurry these people over the border in a way that hides where they're coming from and doesn't allow the government to really be able to process them in an orderly way. And it also would lead to greater impacts upon people who are seeking humanitarian protection.
So from a legal standpoint, does an executive order carry the same weight as a law that would have been passed by Congress?
It does not. And so in the proclamation, the presidential proclamation in which Biden made this executive order, he highlighted time and again the need for Congress to act, and that this was a kind of step in the breach of Congress's inaction to try to do something on the border. But really, legislation is necessary. So that is what the president was calling for in his executive order and presidential proclamation.
Now, one of the things that we've also seen is some incidents of late. There were 8 men arrested at the border on terrorism suspects locally here. We did have a homicide of an individual, I believe, from El Salvador, who was arrested in connection with a local murder here, actually escaped to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Do cases like this highlight the need for stronger controls at the border, especially when you see crimes like this?
Yeah, well, these sorts of tragic incidents really bring to the fore some of the concerns of people who want to make sure we have a safe and secure border. Of course, migrants commit crimes at the same level as U.S. citizens do. So some of the concerns, I think, have to do with, are you creating a system whereby people can come and present themselves? And those 8 who were arrested did present themselves and were processed by the U.S. government and then were later apprehended and charged with civil immigration violations. So the need to keep people orderly and coming and seeking their legal rights is important, and not just pushing them to the sides to come through underground economies, which will really mean that they're not being screened and that there is no protection.
This is clearly a problem that has eluded a solution through Democratic presidents and Republican presidents alike. Is there a legal way to not only control our own border, but also do it in such a way that the political parties might actually come together and get something done? Yeah,
you would hope so. I mean, certainly there have been generations of issues related to the border, and as you've noted, this has been a kind of perpetual concern. There have been more recent efforts, such as bipartisan legislation, to allow people who are lawfully seeking asylum to get work authorization, but that has been scuttled in the Senate. So those sorts of things where people could actually come, be processed, be authorized to work, and being productive and contributing have not really garnered much attention.
Do we have a legitimate way as to ascertaining whether or not somebody is rightfully seeking asylum, or can they just say I need asylum and that's the end of the conversation?
Well, this is part of what the border executive order has done. It has raised that bar for claiming fear. So people can come to the U.S. border and claim fear. They, prior to the order, were asked by an immigration official whether they had fear. The new order means that people have to proclaim and manifest their fear.
A lot of good information there. Cori Alonso-Yoder, she's an associate professor of fundamentals and lawyering at the George Washington University. Thank you so much for joining us this Sunday morning.
Thanks, Tom. Happy Father's Day.